this was different. The wind shifted. The atmosphere felt heavier. And then he saw her. A figure stood at the far end of the landing pad, silhouetted against the fading sun. The way she moved was both graceful and commanding. She wasn't human, of course. He had known that from the moment he set foot on this planet. But the sight of her still sent a shiver down his spine. Queen Nerica, the ruler of the alien species on Kairos, stood there, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that felt almost unnatural. Ethan's first instinct was to reach for his weapon, but something in the way she stood, unarmed yet exuding an air of power, made him hesitate. He didn't need his training to tell him that this was no ordinary encounter. He had been briefed about Nerica, the powerful and enigmatic queen who ruled her people with an iron fist. She was a leader unlike any other he had ever encountered, and despite the political tensions between their species, Ethan had always admired her strength from a distance. But this was different. The calm in her presence, the force with which she held herself, was almost magnetic. Ethan found himself instinctively walking toward her, unable to resist the pull of her gaze. His boots made a soft thud against the metal as he moved closer, but his thoughts were anything but steady. Was this a diplomatic mission? He had completed his assignment, and now the planet was his to leave. But Nirka, it seemed, had other plans. As he approached, her eyes never wavered. She was tall, taller than most human women, and her features were striking. She had a long, elegant face with sharp angles, framed by dark flowing hair that caught the wind like strands of silk. Her eyes, however, were what held him the most. They were a deep violet, a color that seemed to shimmer with an unnatural intelligence, and they seemed to pierce through him, almost as if she were reading his thoughts. There was a quiet strength about her, an undeniable authority that made Ethan feel like a child standing before a queen. "You are Captain Ethan Pierce, correct?" Her voice was calm, yet it carried an authority that demanded attention. Ethan stopped in front of her, only a few paces away, but he couldn't quite bring himself to speak right away. His training had prepared him for countless situations, but this felt different. There was no threat in the air, no sign of an attack, but her presence made him feel like he was standing at the precipice of something much larger than he could comprehend. "Yes, Your Majesty," he replied, his voice steady but betraying a hint of uncertainty. "I've completed my mission. I was about to return to Earth." Nerica nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Your mission may be over," she said softly, her voice low and almost hypnotic, "but there is something I require of you." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. He had assumed that after his mission, his work on Kairos would be done. He had no interest in staying longer than necessary, not with the dangers of the planet and the political tension between their worlds. His job had been to gather intelligence, and now that he had done so, he was ready to leave. But the Queen's words intrigued him, and he couldn't help but ask, "What do you need, Your Majesty?" Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment he felt like she was searching through his very soul. Then she spoke again, her words slow and deliberate. "I need you to come with me," she said, her voice holding a weight that Ethan couldn't quite place. "There is something I must show you." Ethan was about to refuse. He had his orders. His shuttle was waiting, and Earth was counting on him to bring back the intel he had gathered. But then, something in her gaze stopped him. There was a deep sadness in her eyes, a flicker of vulnerability that he hadn't expected from a queen. It was fleeting, but it was there, and it made him pause. "I don't understand," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I've done what I came here to do. I need to return." Nerica didn't flinch. She remained calm, her posture unwavering. "You misunderstand, Captain Pierce." "This is not a request. You will come with me," she said, her tone suddenly more intense. "I have information that concerns you, Information that will change the course of your mission and your future. Ethan's mind raced. He had been trained to think quickly, to make decisions in split seconds. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this. The Queen had an undeniable presence, one that seemed to both compel and caution him. He had no idea what she wanted, but something told him that whatever it was bigger than anything he could have imagined. "You cannot leave," she continued, her voice low and steady. Not yet. His hands were already itching for the familiar controls of his shuttle, but he found himself unable to walk away. There was something about Nurka's presence, something magnetic, that kept him rooted to the spot. With one final look at his shuttle, he nodded. Lead the way," he said, though every fiber of his being screamed to leave. But something told him that turning his back now would be a mistake. As he followed the Queen, walking behind her as she led him into the depths of her palace, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his mission had just taken an unexpected turn. He had thought that he was finished here. He had thought he was going home. But instead, he was walking into an unknown future, one that he couldn't yet see. Captain Ethan Pierce followed Queen Nirka deeper into the palace. He had expected the interior of the structure to be cold and harsh, like the barren landscape of Kairos itself. But what he found was something entirely different. The walls were made of smooth, translucent material that shimmered with a soft, ethereal light. The palace seemed alive, almost as if it were breathing, responding to their movements. The air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers, and soft sounds, like the hum of distant music, filled the air, creating an atmosphere that was both calming and unsettling. He couldn't help but glance at Nirka as she walked ahead of him, her presence commanding yet graceful. She moved with a purpose, her steps measured, but there was something almost haunting about her. Her dark, flowing hair cascaded down her back, and her tall, slender form seemed to glide across the floor with ease. Ethan had seen many powerful leaders in his time, but none like her. There was something different about Nirka, something that felt both ancient and timeless. They passed through several corridors, each more magnificent than the last, until they reached a large chamber. The doors slid open silently as they approached, revealing a room that could only be described as breathtaking. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings that told stories of Nirka's people, their victories, and their struggles. At the center of the room was a large, crystalline structure, glowing softly in the dim light. It looked like a massive, intricate tree, its branches twisting upward in a pattern that seemed almost alive. Nirka stopped before the crystal structure and turned to face Ethan. She gestured for him to approach, and he obeyed, still trying to make sense of the situation. What was it that she wanted from him? What could he possibly have to offer her people, let alone her? "You've seen the surface of Kairos," she said, her voice low and calm. "But there is more to this world than what lies above. My people, we are facing an extinction unlike anything you can imagine." Ethan stood silently, unsure of what to say. He had read the reports, studied the data. He knew about the political unrest on the planet, the centuries-long war between the different alien factions. But this felt different. Nirka's tone was not one of desperation, but of a quiet urgency. There was a weight to her words, a gravity that pulled him in, making it impossible to ignore. "We are a dying race," she continued. "For centuries we've fought to survive, but the war with the Talon Empire has drained us. Our numbers are dwindling, and with each passing day, the odds grow slimmer." Ethan's brow furrowed. "The Talon Empire?" he asked, his voice edged with disbelief. "You're at war with them? I thought that was just a rumor." Nirka's eyes narrowed slightly, but her expression remained calm. "It's not a rumor. The Talons are relentless. Their forces are vast, and they seek to control not just Kairos, but all the planets in this sector. They've already destroyed dozens of our colonies, and now they are setting their sights on our homeworld. Ethan's mind raced. He had been trained to think in terms of strategy and tactics, but this situation was unlike any he had encountered. Earth had its own enemies, yes, but the scale of what Nurka described was overwhelming. A whole empire bent on conquest, willing to destroy entire worlds for power. It seemed like something out of a nightmare. "What does this have to do with me?" he asked, his voice steady, though inside he felt a growing sense of unease. Nurka stepped closer, her violet eyes locking onto his. "You have something that we need," she said, her voice soft but filled with a certain intensity. "Human technology, your military advancements, the way your people fight. That is what we need to turn the tide of this war." Ethan shook his head slightly.
"I don't understand. I'm just one soldier."
"What could I possibly have that's of any use to you?" "You are more than a soldier, Captain Pierce," she said, her gaze piercing through him. "You've seen it in your training, haven't you? The way humans adapt, the way you survive. You fight with a purpose, with a determination that is unmatched by any other species. That is what we need. Your spirit, your drive." Ethan felt a strange weight settle in his chest as her words washed over him. He had always known that humanity was capable of great things, but hearing it spoken by someone who was not human made him feel both proud and uneasy. Was it really that simple? Could the survival of an entire alien race really rest on the shoulders of a single human soldier? "You want me to help you fight this war?" he asked, his voice quiet. Nurka nodded, her expression solemn. "I need you to train my people, to teach them how to fight like humans. How to fight with the same tenacity and resourcefulness that Earth has shown throughout history. We are not prepared for what the Talons are capable of, but with your help, we can turn the tide." Ethan didn't know how to respond. His duty was to Earth. His mission had always been to protect his home, not to fight someone else's war. But there was something in Nurka's eyes, something that made it impossible for him to turn away. "And if I refuse?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nurka's expression softened, though there was still a firmness in her gaze. "Then Kairos will fall, my people will die, and the Talons will continue their conquest." And Earth, she hesitated for a moment as if weighing her words carefully. "Earth will be next. Whether you want to accept it or not, your fate is tied to ours. If we lose, your world will suffer the consequences." Ethan felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He had come here with one mission, to gather intelligence, to complete his task, and then return home. He had not expected to be thrust into a war that seemed as far removed from his world as possible. But now, standing before the alien queen, he could feel the weight of her words settling in his mind. If what she said was true, then Earth was at risk, perhaps more so than he had ever imagined. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. He was a soldier. His mission was to protect humanity, to safeguard his home. But what was the right choice now? What did he owe to these people who, despite being so different from him, were fighting for survival? "I'll help," he said, his voice steady, "but only if it means protecting Earth." Nurka's eyes softened, a rare flicker of relief crossing her face. "Thank you, Captain Pierce. Together we may have a chance." Ethan nodded, but deep down he knew that this was just the beginning. He had stepped into a conflict far larger than he could have imagined, one that could change everything. As he stood there facing the Queen, he knew that his life, his mission, and his fate were no longer his own. The war was just beginning, and whether he was ready or not, he was about to become a part of something far bigger than himself. Captain Ethan Pierce sat in the dimly lit command room, surrounded by the alien warriors Nurka had assembled. He had been on Kairos for 2 weeks now, and the weight of his decision weighed heavily on him. The alien queen had made it clear. Their survival depended on him. The other members of the council, high-ranking officials in Nirka's court, had been watching him closely, sizing him up, wondering what this human could possibly offer. Ethan had been training the warriors, teaching them basic Earth combat tactics, showing them how humans use their environment, how they adapted when the odds were stacked against them. He knew that Earth's military techniques were nothing like what these aliens had ever encountered. The warriors, while physically strong and skilled with their weapons, lacked the kind of strategy that humans use to win wars. It was all about improvisation, adapting to your surroundings, and using the unexpected to your advantage. But it wasn't easy. The aliens' pride ran deep, and many of them resented the idea that a human soldier was teaching them how to fight.
The training had been intense.
They were skeptical at first, not understanding the value of what he was trying to teach them. But Ethan saw it in their eyes. They were desperate, and as much as they resisted the idea of following a human's lead, they knew their backs were against the wall. The Talon Empire's forces were advancing. If they didn't learn to fight differently, they would lose. Nirka had watched quietly from the sidelines as Ethan led the training exercises. Her expression was unreadable, though Ethan couldn't help but notice how she observed him with an intensity that made him feel as if every movement he made was under scrutiny. She had been kind to him, in her own way. But there was always a part of her that remained distant, almost as if she were holding something back. Her people, her kingdom, had been through so much already. Ethan could only imagine the kind of burden she carried on her shoulders. She had never asked him for anything, except for his help, but he could feel that she was depending on him in ways he hadn't yet fully understood. As he finished giving instructions to one of the warriors, Ethan turned to find Nirka standing at the entrance of the training room. She was watching him, her violet eyes sharp, her posture as regal as ever. She had a way of commanding attention without saying a word. Ethan walked over to her, wiping the sweat from his brow. "They're getting better," he said, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. "But it's going to take time." "Your people are strong, but they're not used to thinking on their feet like we do." "I know," Nirka replied, her voice soft, yet filled with an underlying weight. "Time is not something we have much of. The Talon Empire's forces are closing in, and our resources are running out. Every day counts." Ethan looked at her then. Really looked at her. For the first time, he noticed the faint signs of exhaustion around her eyes. The way her posture seemed to have become slightly less rigid, as if the constant pressure was wearing her down. He had seen leaders under stress before, but Nirka was something else. Entirely, she was a queen, a ruler of an entire people, and yet she seemed so alone in her burden. "How are you holding up?" he asked before he could stop himself. Nirka's eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of surprise crossing her face. It was a question no one had asked her before, not in the way he meant it. Her people admired her, yes, but they had never seen the weight of her responsibilities, the loneliness that came with leadership. "I am well," she said after a long pause, her voice steady. "It is my duty to lead my people. Their survival is my responsibility." "I'm sure it's not easy," Ethan said quietly, his voice low. "You don't have to carry all of this alone." Nirka's eyes softened for a brief moment before she regained her composure. She turned away from him, looking out over the battlefield simulation area where the warriors were still training. "I carry the weight because it is mine to bear, but that does not mean I do not see the burden in your eyes as well. You were a soldier on Earth, Captain Pierce. You did not come here to fight for my people, yet you have stayed, and for that I am grateful." Ethan looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of his own choice. He had not come here for this. He had come to complete his mission and return home. He hadn't expected to be caught up in a war that had nothing to do with Earth. And yet, as the days passed, he found himself invested in their struggle, in their survival. He could see the fear in the warriors' eyes when they thought of the Talon forces, the fear in Nirka's when she spoke of the destruction of her people. "I'm not doing it for gratitude," he said after a moment, his voice firm. "I'm doing it because I can't walk away from this. Your people, your world, they don't deserve to fall." Nirka turned back to face him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the silence between them hung heavy, and Ethan couldn't help but feel the pull between them. It wasn't just the war that was keeping him here. It was something else, something that he couldn't explain. There was something about her that drew him in, something more than just her power and authority. It was her vulnerability, her humanity, despite being so far removed from his own. "I know," Nyraka said softly, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. "You have chosen to stay, despite the danger, despite the odds. But there is more at stake than just this world. The Talons do not only want Kairos.
They want the entire sector. If they succeed here, they will turn their eyes to Earth."
Ethan stiffened at the mention of Earth. He had known that the Talons were a threat, but hearing it so plainly from Nirka made the danger feel real. "How do you know?" he asked, his voice tense. "Are they planning to attack Earth?" "We have intercepted communications," Nirka replied. "The Talons know of Earth. They believe your planet is rich in resources, untouched by the war that has ravaged our worlds. They will come for you, Captain Pierce. It is only a matter of time." Ethan's mind raced. Earth was his home, the place he had fought to protect his entire life. The thought that it could be under threat from an alien empire was a hard pill to swallow. He had no idea how to prepare Earth for an enemy like the Talons, or how to stop them. But as he looked at Nirka, something clicked inside him. This wasn't just about Kairos anymore. It was about Earth's future. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice firm with resolve. "How do we stop them?" Nirka's gaze softened, though her expression was still filled with determination. "We fight together, Earth and Kairos. The war is not just mine. It is yours as well." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding now that his role here was more than just a soldier helping another species. It was about saving both their worlds from the same enemy. He wasn't just teaching them how to fight, he was preparing them for the battle that would decide their future. As they stood there, looking out at the warriors training below, Ethan felt a strange sense of purpose. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a cause, and whatever it took, he would fight for it, for Kairos, for Earth, and for the survival of everything he held dear.